Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. Even as the ghost face cursed inwardly, Bai Xiaochun sat there cross-legged in meditation, continuously absorbing the explosive life force into his bloodstream, fueling the growth of his undying blood. Gradually, his undying blood neared the 90% level. Then, the following morning, his eyes snapped open. A blood-colored light gleamed therein, and cracking sounds emanated out from inside of him. At the same time, he radiated an intense energy. The air around him rippled and distorted, seemingly incapable of withstanding the force, and even the world as a whole trembled. 90%. Bai Xiaochun's eyes shone with exuberant delight as he slowly rose to his feet. Because of his progress with his undying blood, he could tell that although his blood was still red, his bones were almost completely golden. According to the description in the Undying Codex, he would reach a point where heaven and earth could be destroyed, but his body could not. As of this moment, he could clearly sense that, not only was his fleshly body powerful to an extreme degree, his regenerative capabilities were astonishing beyond description. Unless someone was able to kill me in one shot, I can basically recover from any injury, given enough time. Heavens, so much power. His heart was already racing with the thought of having 100% undying blood in his veins. If I'm this strong at 90%, I wonder what the great circle of undying blood will be like. Brimming with excitement, he flew back over to the ghost face. The ghost face had assumed that the nightmare was over, and had been cursing Bai Xiaochun ever since, and simultaneously swearing oaths of revenge. However, when he saw Bai Xiaochun approaching, his expression flickered dramatically. Then he saw the eternal parasol, and his madness transformed into bitter despair. No, rumbling sounds echoed out as the eternal parasol stabbed into the ghost face, who screamed unceasingly as his life force began to flow out of him. There was nothing he could do to fight back, and as the process continued, his divine soul continued to fade. On the first day, he had vowed to hang in there. But this time, he couldn't hang in any longer. Sadly, despite how he tried to struggle, the only thing he could do was scream. I hate you, Bai Xiaochun. I was wrong, Lord Bai. I was truly in the wrong. No, it hurts. Glaring, Bai Xiaochun bopped the ghost face on the top of his head. Calm down. What are you shrieking for? You were fine yesterday, weren't you? It's just a bit of life force. Once you get used to it, you won't even notice. The ghost face hollered until he ran out of energy, whereupon he lay there twitching, filled with more grief than could fit into the heaven-span sea. Yet again, he deeply regretted leaving Ghost Mother. He regretted letting the Celestial grab him, and regretted delivering himself up to Bai Xiaochun. Why is my life so horrible? And how can this heaven-damned Bai Xiaochun be so merciless? The ghost face's heart now had enough tears built up to flood the world with torrential downpours. I swear, with my last bit of life, with all of my cultivation base, with all of my being, that if I get out of here, then I'll slowly slice Bai Xiaochun into pieces. I'll torture him for 10,000 years. At some unknown point, the ghost face eventually just passed out. When he woke up, Bai Xiaochun was gone. The ghost face examined himself, and was shocked to find that he was almost completely empty. He only had about 10% of his original reserve of life force left. In the first session, Bai Xiaochun had only taken about 10%. But in the following 2 days, he took a full 80%. The ghost was simply floored. His divine soul seemed like it might shatter at any moment, as though it had been trampled underfoot by millions of soldiers. Merciless people like him should be killed at birth. The ghost face howled. The truth was that the ghost face wasn't quite looking at the situation properly. After he passed out, Bai Xiaochun could easily have just taken all of his life force. But Bai Xiaochun couldn't bring himself to do something that heartless, and had left him with 10%. Well, I've tormented the old man quite a bit over the past 2 years, Bai Xiaochun had said. I guess I should show a bit of compassion. Whatever. I'll let him recover a bit, and then take some more later. Sighing at how kind he was, he had left to meditate and push his undying blood to the great circle. After absorbing enough life force, his undying blood experienced explosive advancement. At long last, the last drop of blood inside of him became undying blood, and his entire body filled with intense rumbling sounds. Undying blood, 100%. Stabbing pain filled every corner of his being, causing his eyes to widen and turn completely bloodshot. Cracking sounds emanated out from him until it almost looked like his skin was being ripped apart. Underneath the ripped skin, it was actually possible to see his blood flowing in his veins. His bones, his energy passageways, and everything else about him began to transform, almost as if he were acquiring a brand new body. After about 10 breaths of time passed, the pain grew so intense that he threw his head back and howled. A moment later, his entire body seemed to wither up, and then, explode. What exploded was merely the surface, though. As the bits flew out in all directions, a brand new Bai Xiaochun was revealed beneath. He was sparkling and almost translucent, like a piece of fine jade. However, the process wasn't over. He withered again, and then exploded. Then the process happened a third time, a fourth time, and a fifth time. 8 times in a row, he withered and then exploded. By that point, he shone with blinding light, and seemed something completely out of the ordinary. If anyone had been able to lay eyes on him in that moment, they would have been completely shocked. He was clearly not a mortal, and in fact, had surpassed a fleshly body limit for cultivators. Demigod Fleshly Body, he murmured, slowly looking up. His eyes shone like the sun and moon, making him look like a god descended onto the world. That means, there's still one more step. Eyes shining with anticipation, he cast his senses inward, to detect the 5th shackle of the human body, like an enormous mountain weighing down on him. After all these years, I've finally cultivated the undying codex, all the way to the Great Circle. He threw his hands up into the air, causing his blood, his bones, his tendons, his flesh, and his skin to all thrum with terrifying, explosive power. His energy surged like angry waves of the sea, causing heaven and earth to suddenly grow dim in response. Then he spoke, his voice echoing like heavenly thunder. 5th shackle. Break. Boom. The massive, mountainous weight on his shoulders suddenly shattered into pieces, causing the entire world of the magical item to shake violently. Yet again, cracks spread out over his skin, and he withered rapidly. Then, he exploded for a 9th time. When he reappeared, he had the most perfect of perfect bodies. What aura is that? The ghost face cried in alarm. In that exact same moment, the face of the baby girl up in the sky opened her eyes and looked over at Bai Xiaochun in shock, apparently recalling complex memories of the past. His breakthrough in the Undying Codex even affected the outside world. The sky in the north transformed into an enormous vortex which caused all of the lands of Heavenspan to tremble. Out in the wildlands, both opposing armies could sense the drastic transformations, and looked over to see massive rifts spreading out in the sky from the north. It almost looked like the sky was about to shatter. Even the earth seemed like it was about to crack into pieces. On numerous battlefields throughout the lands, cultivators from the wildlands and the Heavenspan region all looked around, all of them equally shaken by the premonition that the world was about to be torn apart. What's going on? Heavens! Why is the sky crumbling? Core formation cultivators, nascent soul experts, and even devas were shaken. Many from the river-defying sect were included. Demigod experts from both sides gasped in open shock. Mistress Red Dust was caught completely unprepared. She, like most other wildlanders, assumed that the Celestial was responsible. Only a handful of people knew the truth. For example, in Arch-Emperor City, deep within the third part of the city that was buried underneath the ground, in a crumbling pagoda, was the Gravekeeper. As he sat there cross-legged, he opened his weary eyes. He looked particularly old, and fairly radiated an aura of decay. By now, he was like an oil lamp on the verge of winking out, his eyes cloudy as he slowly raised his head skyward. The Undying Codex, mastered. I think I know what the Celestial plans to do. Bai Xiaochun, I hope that in the end, you don't hate me. There's nothing else I can do. This is my mission, the entire point of my existence. In the illusory underworld river was the reigning Hell Emperor, Bai Hao. As he stood there looking out on heaven and earth, he murmured, Master. In addition to those two, there was another person who understood what was happening. He was the reigning Arch-Emperor. Although he had been made little more than a puppet by the Grand Heaven Master, he was still the Arch-Emperor. The blood of the imperial clan ran in his veins, and as he sat there on the dragon throne in the imperial palace, he shivered. It was a reaction that came from sensing someone else who cultivated the same technique as him. It came from his blood, and even his soul. After all, the Arch-Emperors also cultivated the Undying Live Forever technique. Someone has succeeded the Blood Ancestor, and reached the Great Circle of the Undying Codex. The despair that had filled the Arch-Emperor's eyes was suddenly replaced with hope. Those three were the only ones in the wildlands who knew the truth of what was happening. When it came to the forces from the Heavenspan region, as the sky seemed to crumble, a shocking aura erupted out from Heavenspan Island. The Great Circle of the Undying Codex. The Celestial rose to his feet within the Palace of the Tao. Throwing his head back, he laughed uproariously. At the same time, tears began to stream down his cheeks, and they were not tears of joy. However, the determination in his eyes did not fade. The strategy I didn't wish to employ is playing out perfectly. Is it destiny, Gravekeeper? In the sect headquarters of the river-defying sect, the enormous blood ancestor shivered imperceptibly. Had Bai Xiaochun been there, he would have been able to hear a voice speaking that almost seemed to be an illusion. I held my breath yesterday, to awaken today. The world shook for what seemed like a never-ending moment. As for Bai Xiaochun, he took a deep breath as he rose to his feet, the fragments of his old self crumbling off of him. The magical item around him trembled violently, as though it were trying to keep him in check, an instinctual response of the world itself, and the will of the baby girl. The great circle of the Diva realm. I've mastered the undying codex. Bai Xiaochun closed his eyes to feel the boundless life force flowing within him. After a moment, he opened his eyes, which shone with the only color that existed in the world around him. Time to go home, he said softly. He looked up at the face of the baby girl, and met her gaze. He didn't say anything. Everything that needed to be said was visible in his eyes. At this point, Bai Xiaochun didn't care if she had some other plans that she hadn't explained to him. With his cultivation base and shocking fleshly body power, he was fairly certain that he could handle her if necessary. Mixed emotions could be seen in the eyes of the baby girl as she quietly said, "Congratulations. The great circle of the undying codex. I will abide by our agreement for the rest of my life. You may use the magical item of the north 3 times. If you can kill the celestial, then you will be my master for all time." The baby girl didn't waste any more time. Her eyes began to shine with mysterious light, causing the entire magical item to tremble. The lands cracked as a huge stone gate suddenly rose up from nowhere. As the majestic stone gate rose up, the world around it crumbled away into emptiness, until nothing existed except for the gate. From here, the baby girl said slowly, you can return to the northern ice plains. Bai Xiaochun looked at the gate, his eyes shining with anticipation. He had been waiting for this moment for a long time. At the moment, he felt more than a little nervous about what the world outside might be like, considering how much time had passed. I wonder how the river-defying sect is doing. With that, he blurred into motion, heading directly toward the stone gate. As for the ghost face, he was weak and nervous but at the same time, excited. As the world collapsed around him, he fixed his gaze on the gate and began to fly toward it, more focused on escaping than the celestial was focused on escaping the lands of Heavenspan. However, because of all the life force which had been drained from him, he was very weak, and could no longer use the teleportation secret magic he had prepared. If he did, he would destroy himself in the process. Take me with you, he wailed. You can put any restrictive spells on me that you want. I'll be your ghost slave. Once my cultivation base is back, that would mean you had a quasi-celestial ghost slave at your command. In response, Bai Xiaochun stopped in place and looked back at the ghost face. He had considered this possibility before, but had abandoned the idea. After all, he wasn't completely confident in using such methods of enslavement. Without the magical item to suppress the ghost face's cultivation base, there was no saying what he could do. And Bai Xiaochun didn't want to put himself face to face with one of the most powerful enemies in the world. After some more consideration, he simply turned and continued on toward the gate. Take me with you, Bai Xiaochun, the ghost face shrieked anxiously. He tried to fly forward, but the world of the magical item suppressed him. The baby girl looked at him, and he suddenly felt as if he were about to be crushed. There was no way for him to even move. All he could do was watch wide-eyed as Bai Xiaochun slowly approached the gate. Bai Xiaochun, he shrieked. Shut up, Bai Xiaochun said with a frown, turning to look at the ghost face. I'll never trust you, no matter what you say. Just wait here. After I'm a demigod, then I'll let you out. You. The ghost face felt like he was about to collapse mentally. After all of the hanging in there, all with the goal of escaping, he was now having his hopes dashed to pieces. Considering the determination he saw in Bai Xiaochun's eyes, he knew that there was no hope left. Heaven damn you, Bai Xiaochun. Curse you. Bai Xiaochun sighed loftily, musing to himself that only a fool would trust anything the ghost face said. Now that he had achieved his cultivation base breakthrough, and was in the great circle of the Diva realm, with a demigod fleshly body, he couldn't have been in higher spirits. I could crush you to death with a single slap of my palm, Chen Hichan. And I'm not afraid of any of you northerners anymore either. Not even your demigod. Filled with excitement at the thought of how shocked everyone would be to see him, he stepped forward into the stone gate. Instantly, the gate began to emit rumbling sounds, and then, he vanished. When he reappeared, he was back on the plains of the north. A warm breeze suddenly touched him, not anything like a heatwave, but enough to be considered pleasant. He could immediately sense the spiritual energy of the Heavenspan Sea, which was a wonderful feeling. Hold on, I should be in the north. How come the wind isn't cold? When he examined his surroundings further, his eyes nearly popped out of his head. Did the frigid matriarch send me to the wrong place? Is this really the north? He found himself looking around at a jungle filled with lush vegetation. Furthermore, visible throughout the greenery were countless little moonflowers. Bai Xiaochun's expression flickered. Moonflower, baby. After flying along for a bit in somewhat of a daze, he confirmed that he really was in the north. During the few short years which had passed, the north had changed so much that it was almost like a dream. Roughly 80% of the north no longer had any ice plains. Instead, it was covered with rich soil and a dense jungle. The entire jungle was actually made of moonflowers. Beads of sweat now covered Bai Xiaochun's forehead as he realized the enormity of what he had done so many years ago. Although he had known that the moonflower was powerful, he could never have imagined that in a few short years, it would occupy the entire northern Heavenspan River region. What was even more strange was that the northerners had apparently just let the moonflowers grow freely, and hadn't cleared them away. Of course, he had no way of knowing that the northerners had tried many times to do just that. But nothing did any good. Furthermore, as war loomed, the northern demigod and devas eventually didn't have time to worry about moonflowers. All of their thoughts had been occupied with the upcoming invasion of the wildlands. Who could ever have guessed how dramatically the moonflowers would grow in only a few years? Perhaps if action had been taken early on, the northerners might have been able to do something about it. But the matter of the war made that impossible. Bai Xiaochun was completely shaken. He proceeded along for a while until he caught sight of the Nine Heavens Cloud Lightning sect. The changes there weren't as dramatic as elsewhere. The sect was still surrounded by plains of ice. Apparently, it was the only location in the north that still remained that way. However, the sect was surrounded by countless moonflowers. As for the two ice statues that formed the sect headquarters, they were significantly melted. It was no longer possible to make out their facial features, and they looked like little more than columns of ice. Bai Xiaochun already felt a bit guilty. Unfortunately, it wouldn't be very convenient to return to the river-defying sect without using the teleportation portal in the Nine Heavens Cloud Lightning sect. Bracing himself, he continued onward. As he neared, it was to his surprise that he couldn't sense a single diva in the sect. Neither was the demigod present. In fact, nearly 80% of the cultivators were apparently gone. Most of those left behind were Foundation Establishment cultivators and Qi condensation disciples. Because of how few cultivators were present, it made the enormous, mighty sect seem somewhat like a wasteland. If that were all there were to it, it might not be a big deal. However, virtually all of the scattered cultivators who remained in the sect seemed very unsettled, and were sighing constantly. Bai Xiaochun's heart began to pound with a very ill premonition. Without the slightest hesitation, he sped toward the sect. As he neared, the sect's grand spell formation activated to prevent him from getting too close. At the same time, a sound like an echoing alarm klaxon filled the entire sect. Of course, a huge commotion ensued. What's going on? The enemy is attacking. Although the sect's defensive spell formation was powerful, to Bai Xiaochun's undying hex, it posed little obstacle. In fact, he didn't even slow down, and a moment later, was in the middle of the sect. Countless terrified gazes locked onto him, and soon, people recognized who he was, leading to shouts of alarm. It's Bai Xiaochun. Heavens! What is he doing back? I thought he was missing. Damn it, the demigod patriarch and the devas are all on the battlefield, and now Bai Xiaochun shows up here with killing intent? What's he planning to do? The buzz in the sect caused Bai Xiaochun's uneasy feeling to grow stronger. Looking around at the panic, he shouted, "All of you shut the hell up." His voice roared through the sect like heavenly thunder, a deafening sound which instantly silenced all of the clamor. Pointing urgently at one of the cultivators who was in the great circle of Foundation establishment, he said, "Tell me immediately why there are so few of you here. Where is Master Cloud Lightning? Where's the demigod patriarch? Where did everyone go?" The cultivator trembled in fear, but immediately clasped hands and bowed in formal fashion. Not daring to hold anything back, he quickly began to provide an explanation. The 4 river source sects have gone to war with the wildlands. Everyone else is in the wildlands, fighting. What? Bai Xiaochun shouted, so completely thunderstruck that he didn't even wait for any further explanation. All of a sudden, his mind was overwhelmed by the thought of the wildlands and the Heavenspan region at war. Everyone else here was used to the fact that the war had been going on for years now. But this was Bai Xiaochun's first time hearing about it, and the news immediately caused him to feel very nervous. He thought about his apprentice Bai Hao, the giant ghost king, and Mistress Red Dust. There was no time to waste here in the north. He immediately began to hurry toward the teleportation portal. Of course, he was already famous in the Nine Heavens Cloud Lightning sect. The disciples viewed him as some sort of demonic god of pestilence. Therefore, they did everything they could to activate the teleportation portal as quickly as possible. Only after the light began to fade away along with Bai Xiaochun did they breathe sighs of relief. The teleportation portals in the river source sects could send people all the way across the Heavenspan Sea to the other river source sects. Therefore, it only took a short moment for Bai Xiaochun to go from the north to the east, and arrive in the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect. The Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect's teleportation portal was located on the blue rainbow. As soon as it began to shine with light, the disciples manning the portal were shaken, and looked over to see who it was that was arriving. Xu Baosai was sitting there cross-legged within the group. His cultivation base was high enough to join in the war effort, but he had been seriously injured and sent back to the sect for rest and recovery. However, he knew that it wouldn't be long before he was sent back to the battlefield. By this point in the war, he was already weary of all the fighting. He had seen many people die, to the point where any fear in him had burned away, replaced by simple exhaustion. His injuries had been severe, and were it not for the fact that his opponent had recognized him as being from the river-defying sect, and thus held back, he would likely have died. Despite being shown mercy, Xu Baosai's cultivation base had been severely damaged, sending him all the way back down to the Foundation establishment level. Although he had recovered some since then, it seemed unlikely that he would ever return to his previous level. That realization filled Xu Baosai with grief. He also wondered how much longer the war would go on. It had already been years now, and both sides had suffered casualties. From what he could tell, the next time he went to the battlefield might be his last. Perhaps he would never return to the east, and would end up dead and buried far from home. When the teleportation portal began to light up, Xu Baosai noticed, but didn't pay much attention. After glancing over, he looked away. Before anyone could even see who was teleporting in, a terrifying pressure filled the air. Divine sense swept out from the teleportation portal in all directions, filling the entire Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect. It was a divine sense so powerful that nothing in the entire sect could be hidden from it. Everyone began to tremble where they stood, and Xu Baosai even gasped. He had encountered divine sense like this before on the battlefield, and was certain that this was someone who surpassed a diva. It could only be a demigod patriarch. The demigod is back? Even before Xu Baosai could do anything, a familiar voice entered his ears. Xu Baosai, huh? Xu Baosai replied, jaw-dropping. His mind almost immediately went blank as the air rippled, and Bai Xiaochun stepped out into the open. Xu Baosai stared in complete shock, unable to do anything as Bai Xiaochun walked up to him. Bai Xiaochun frowned and waved his hand, sending warm energy into Xu Baosai. A moment later, cracking sounds could be heard as Xu Baosai's injuries were all healed. When Xu Baosai felt the warmth inside of him, and sensed the fluctuations of his cultivation base, the despair he had felt for so long vanished. His eyes brightened as he rapidly rose back into the core formation stage, prompting him to shout, Bai Xiaochun. Junior Patriarch. The last time the river-defying sect had heard from Bai Xiaochun, he had sent a message about staying in the north with Du Lingfei. After that, they heard nothing. Then the war broke out, with casualties mounting on both sides. Eventually, no one in the river-defying sect had the time or energy to worry about Bai Xiaochun. As the days wore on, the only thing that occupied their thoughts was the fighting. It was the same with Xu Baosai. Only occasionally would he think about the spectacular junior patriarch of the sect. They had met each other as rivals for a spot in the ovens, which was when Xu Baosai had written a blood notice and furiously delivered it to Bai Xiaochun. Destiny was usually impossible to fight against. That was something that Xu Baosai had come to sigh about quite often, especially after being injured in the war. As of this moment, however, all such sighs were driven away, replaced by utter astonishment. Not only were his injuries completely healed, but he was now standing right in front of the missing Bai Xiaochun. Especially noteworthy was Bai Xiaochun's cultivation base fluctuations. To Xu Baosai's astonishment, Bai Xiaochun was even more powerful than he had been in the past. Although he couldn't assess the level of his cultivation base, there was something profound about it that Xu Baosai had only sensed in demigods before. Junior Patriarch, you. Xu Baosai's mind was so blank that he couldn't even speak. What happened while I was gone? Bai Xiaochun asked urgently. Where did everybody go? And, how are they? From the bloodshot state of Bai Xiaochun's eyes, Xu Baosai could tell that now was not the time to chat idly. Shooting to his feet, he immediately began to explain the situation. Junior Patriarch, the Wildlands and the Heavenspan region have gone to war. With that, he began to give a full report. Xu Baosai had always been inclined to gathering information, and that was even more the case considering that he had personally been on the front lines of battle. He went on to give a very detailed accounting of what had happened while Bai Xiaochun was in the world of the magical item. The more Bai Xiaochun heard, the more his heart began to swell with emotion. He came to know that the Celestial had issued orders for the 4 great river source sects, as well as all their subordinate sects, to wage war on the Wildlands. He heard that the fighting was intense and bitter. The Wildlands had been forced into a slow retreat, causing their territory to shrink and shrink. They now only occupied about 40 to 50% of their original lands. In order to put as much pressure on the Wildlanders as possible, the Celestial had mobilized roughly 80% of the total cultivators from the lands of Heavenspan. As a result, the war being fought now defied comparison to any other war in history. Bai Xiaochun also learned that about half a year ago, the fighting had begun to grow even more intense than before. The Celestial seemed impatient and was willing to pay any price to achieve victory. He didn't even seem to care how many lives were lost. In fact, he had recently issued orders pushing all of his armies toward a final showdown. The 4 river source sects were attacking from 4 directions, giving the Wildlanders no options for retreat. As a result, the numbers of deaths and injuries had reached incalculable levels. Blood and corpses covered the lands. According to Xu Baosai's description, the ground in the Wildlands was the color of blood, and the number of dead souls that filled heaven and earth was impossible to describe. Apparently, the cycle of reincarnation had been broken, making it impossible for souls to enter the underworld river. They could only haunt the battlefields to no end. It was no longer a rare thing for a diva to be killed in the fighting. 9 diva experts from the 4 river source sects had perished, and on the Wildlands side, 6 of the heavenly dukes had been killed. And there was little need to mention the nascent soul experts and Wildlander heavenly marquises. It had already reached the point where a death among their numbers would hardly cause a ripple of shock on either side. The Wildlands' 4 heavenly kings and the Heavenspan region's 4 demigod patriarchs have fought each other on numerous occasions. Grievous injuries resulted each time, and once, one of them almost perished. If things keep going on like this, you can easily imagine a scenario in which one of the demigods dies. In fact, it will likely be more than one. I'm afraid that in the end, both the Wildlands and the Heavenspan region will have sustained terrible losses. It was with great bitterness that Xu Baosai explained everything he knew. None of us in the river-defying sect feel like fighting. And we're not the only ones. I've heard that a lot of disciples from other river source sects feel the same. But that doesn't matter. The only one who has the power to stop the fighting is the Celestial. If he wants to keep going, we have no choice but to follow his orders. The river-defying sect had no other option but to follow the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect into battle. It's been going on for years now, and the main opponent of the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect is the Giant Ghost Legion, led by one of the Wildlands' 4 heavenly kings, the Giant Ghost King. Bai Xiaochun's heart trembled at what he was hearing. He had long hoped that this moment would never come, but come it had. He didn't want anyone from the river-defying sect or the Giant Ghost King's forces to be hurt. It was just like back in the days of the Bloodstream sect and the Spirit Stream sect. It's a good thing that the Giant Ghost Legion is led by Mistress Red Dust. Nobody knows why, but she has shown mercy to the river-defying sect over and over again. If it weren't for that, there wouldn't be many of us left. The downside is that it has led to the rest of the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect being suspicious of us. In fact, the Diva Patriarchs issued orders making us the vanguard of the army. By this point, Xu Baosai couldn't prevent his frustration and madness from erupting. Junior Patriarch, it was only 3 days ago that I got a new intelligence report. The Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect's main army has the Giant Ghost Legion trapped inside of Giant Ghost City. It's the final showdown. What are we supposed to do? Bai Xiaochun's heart was pounding, and his bitterness seemed to know no end. Although no one else might know why Mistress Red Dust was showing mercy to the river-defying sect, he knew. Although he was moved, the fact that the Starry Sky Dao Polarity sect had taken advantage of that fact to put the river-defying sect on the front lines caused his anger to burn. However, he knew that now was not the time for passion, but for calmness and clarity. The river-defying sect is my home. I can't allow my family to be hurt. But the Giant Ghost King and I are good friends. And Zemo, well, I can't let her get hurt either. What do I do? What am I supposed to do? His eyes were bloodshot, and his chest heaved as he stood there trying to make a decision. Shu Baosai's words had turned into something like a tempest inside of him. Although he had always known that the wildlands and the Heavenspan region would eventually devolve into all-out war, it had happened too suddenly. He had been caught completely unprepared. Worse, he had wasted years inside of the world of the magical item, to the point where the final battle was already close. Why? Why does there always have to be this fighting and killing? Immortal cultivation is about living forever. Why does it always get made into a matter of people ending each other's lives? His hands were clenched so tightly that they were shaking. Well, I stopped the war between the Bloodstream sect and the Spirit Stream sect. And now, I can do the same thing with the Wildlands and the Heavenspan region. Yeah, that's right. Plus, the Celestial said that when I'm a demigod, I can be with my boo. And I'm Hauer's master. I can definitely stop this. It's all because the Celestial wants to leave this world. Well, if he wants to leave, just let him leave. I'll talk to the Gravekeeper. I'll hash things out with Hauer. We'll just open the world gate and let him go. Bai Xiaochun was thinking 1,000 things at the same time, and was grasping at any idea he could, not even bothering to think about whether they were realistic. Without any more contemplation, he shot up into the sky. I'm going to stop this war. With that, he resorted to the fastest speed possible, causing the air to ripple and distort around him. Peals of thunder exploded out as he vanished, in the direction of the Deadmire. Instead of wasting time sailing a ship across the Heavenspan Sea, he would go as quickly as he could to the battlefield. He would traverse the Deadmire, enter the Wildlands, and head directly toward Giant Ghost City. Bai Xiaochun knew the way well. Rumbling sounds echoed out in all directions as he unhesitatingly headed to the Deadmire, and then entered it. There was no time for coming up with complicated plans. He only had one thought in mind. Faster. I have to go faster. Rumble. After an indeterminable period of time in the Deadmire, he shot out, into the Wildlands. As soon as he entered the Wildlands, the reek of blood and gore assailed his nostrils. Looking around, he saw that the already barren and infertile terrain looked even more desolate. Everything seemed stained deep crimson, and was filled with a sensation of rot. Although the clues of magical combat could not be seen literally everywhere, it was so pervasive that it was almost omnipresent. Severed limbs, broken bones, and other evidence bore testimony to the countless small-scale skirmishes that had taken place here and there. The wildlands had already been devoid of vegetation in most places, and now it was even more so. In fact, the desolate landscape was now covered with rifts and crevices, with many mountains having been completely destroyed. He passed one area with a diameter of 500 kilometers, which was filled with a muddy slush that emanated an aura of death, and was filled with countless corpses from both sides of the conflict. Carrion birds congregated among the corpses, picking away at gore and flesh, only to be frightened into the air by Bai Xiaochun's passage. Masses of them began to fill the sky, staring at Bai Xiaochun with gray, frightened eyes. The sight of all the corpses caused Bai Xiaochun to shiver. He had seen too many such battlefields in his life. After all, he had fought in quite a few wars. Whether it was the war of the four sects in the lower reaches, the numerous fights in the middle reaches, or the fierce combat at the Great Wall, Bai Xiaochun was well acquainted with the savagery of warfare. But nothing he had ever seen could compare to this. In the wars he had experienced, the battlefields were usually tended to after the fighting. But in this great war between the Wildlands and the Heavenspan region, no one was going around cleaning up after the fighting. It was hard to say how long these particular corpses had been here. However, the state of decay they were in caused a gory, fetid aroma to fill heaven and earth. After merely glancing around, Bai Xiaochun turned and continued to head toward Giant Ghost City. After he left, the carrion birds calmed down, and eventually went back to their feasting. Time flew by, although Bai Xiaochun wasn't very conscious of exactly how much. All he knew was that there was no time to waste. Therefore, he used all the means and power at his disposal to speed toward his destination. Any other demigod would have had trouble matching such protracted speed. But Bai Xiaochun had mastered the undying blood, and thus had unimaginable powers of regeneration. Even after sustained periods of explosive speed, both his fleshly body and his cultivation base were still at their peak. He moved so quickly that, from a distance, he was nothing more than a beam of light streaking through the air. As he got deeper into the wildlands, he passed one abandoned battlefield after another, causing him to tremble more and more. The first 500-kilometer-wide battlefield was actually nothing compared to what he saw later. He saw some which were thousands of kilometers across. There was one which was more than 5,000 kilometers from end to end. Bai Xiaochun wasn't sure what to think about that. All he knew was that he had never seen such a scene of bloody slaughter. Craters and ravines covered the landscape. Areas which had once been jungles or forests were now burned to the ground, leaving behind little but cinders and ash. The savage tribes which had dotted the area were no more. Furthermore, the oversized corpses of the giants were particularly conspicuous on the battlefields. Why? Bai Xiaochun murmured. The closer he got to Giant Ghost City, the more his anxiety and madness built. Eventually, when he was actually within the territory that was controlled by Giant Ghost City, he saw a glowing golden shield that pulsed with the aura of heaven-span seawater. Clearly, that shield was keeping the entire area locked down. In the very middle of the area protected by the shield, in a location far away, but close enough for Bai Xiaochun to see, was a sight that brought back many memories. Giant Ghost City. The golden shield was obviously created by a spell formation, and was designed to prevent anyone from interfering. The Heavenspan forces wanted Giant Ghost City trapped and isolated. As long as the Giant Ghost Legion managed to hold the line, they would be fine, but if they were defeated, then that golden shield would become like an enormous prison that no wildlander would be able to escape. All of them would be exterminated. That shield couldn't have made it more obvious that the Celestial was intent on wiping out the heart and soul of the wildlands. The sight of it caused Bai Xiaochun's eyes to become even more bloodshot. Just as he was about to use his undying hex to pierce through the shield, it shimmered, and 3 faces appeared on its surface. They were all old men, one of whom had a golden horn protruding from his forehead. All 3 thrummed with diva fluctuations. 2 seemed to be in the late diva realm, but the third, the old man with the horn, was in the Great Circle, just like Chen Haosong. When they saw Bai Xiaochun approaching from off in the distance, their pupils constricted. They could sense that he was in the Great Circle of the diva realm, and that he pulsed with the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Eyes flashing sharply, the old man with the horn coolly said, "He's not a wildlander, Heavenly Duke. But nobody from the 4 rivers is in the Great Circle. Halt. I am Arcane Guard Yang Chen from Heavenspan Island. I'm here on orders from the Celestial to maintain this life-severing spell formation. I don't care which sect you come from, Diva, leave immediately, or you will be executed." These old men were actually not from any of the 4 river source sects. They were from Heavenspan Island, and worked directly for the Celestial. They were a type of guard that outranked the special guards. They were arcane guards. Arcane guards were recruited from throughout the Heavenspan region, and then propelled into the Diva realm by means of a secret magic. No one knew exactly how many of them there were, not even the demigod patriarchs from the 4 rivers. They were yet another secret weapon that the Celestial used to maintain control. There was even a rumor of a group that outranked the arcane guards. The Divine Guards. All of the special and arcane guards from Heavenspan had been deployed, not only to root out and execute enemy resistance, but also to act as a sort of military police. In fact, their life-severing grand spell formation was part of their mission to carry out the final extermination of the enemy. As far as these arcane guards were concerned, other than the demigods, no one from the 4 rivers qualified to deserve their respect. Devas from the 4 river source sects were the type of people the arcane guards could berate at any time they wished. Under any other circumstance, Bai Xiaochun would have provided a polite explanation. But right now, he was gripped by anxiety. He knew that the Giant Ghost King was at war with the river-defying sect and the other eastern sects. Therefore, there was no time to waste giving explanations to people who wanted to block his path. Therefore, instead of slowing down, he actually accelerated. He was like a bolt loosed from a crossbow, shooting toward the golden shield at incredible speed. Suicidal recklessness, said the old man with the horn, his eyes flickering with disdain. Despite the fact that Bai Xiaochun's cultivation base rippled with the fluctuations of the Great Circle of the Diva realm, the old man still snorted coldly. "Kill him." The other 2 arcane guards chuckled, and the enormous faces which represented them shrank down into 2 shadowy blurs that flew out from the spell formation and headed toward Bai Xiaochun. From the way they glowed with the same golden light as the spell formation, it was obvious that they had clearly been powered up by it. The spell formation contained shocking power that, when focused onto a diva, could push his or her battle prowess very close to the level of the Great Circle. Clearly, the power provided by the spell formation was the reason why the horned old man and his companions were so confident and arrogant. "It doesn't matter who tries to attack the life-severing grand spell formation," shouted one of the incoming arcane guards, his voice echoing like thunder. "Anyone who violates the orders of the Celestial will be killed." As the 2 devas closed in, they performed incantation gestures, summoning a huge golden scorpion that charged toward Bai Xiaochun, radiating killing intent. "Get the hell out of my way!" Bai Xiaochun shouted, pushing forward with even greater speed. His voice became a shockwave that rumbled out with mountain-toppling, sea-draining force. The two arcane guards had no time to even get close to Bai Xiaochun. The power of his shout slammed into them, causing blood to spray from their mouths as massive force crushed into them. Their golden scorpion couldn't fight back, and to the shock of the two devas, completely exploded. He's no diva. The two arcane guards' expressions were those of complete shock, to the point where their eyes were about to explode. Bai Xiaochun's voice had been propelled by his cultivation base and battle prowess, and resulted in destructive force that could decimate any other diva. He was the most powerful of all devas. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.